Jessica Dishan was born on May 2, 1982, in the quaint American town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, a community characterized by its agricultural roots and close-knit relationships among residents. She was the eldest of three siblings, having two younger brothers, and from a young age, she assisted her parents in caring for them while they worked. This responsibility fostered a sense of independence in Jessica, making her a reliable support for her family. At the age of 15, she secured a part-time position at a local restaurant to save for her first car, a red Pontiac that she had long desired. A few years later, her hard work paid off, and she was able to purchase the vehicle. Despite her job, Jessica maintained excellent academic performance and began planning for college with the intention of pursuing a career in accounting. In the fall of 1999, at the age of 17, she entered her senior year of high school and began dating a boy, which brought her great joy. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, her day commenced like any other. Her parents left for work while she remained asleep, and her younger brothers departed for school. Jessica was scheduled to drive herself to school later that day. However, around noon, when her mother returned home, she immediately sensed something was amiss as Jessica's car was parked in front of the house. The mother entered the house and proceeded to her daughter's room, despite the fact that Jessica should have been in class at that time. Initially, she assumed that Jessica might have overslept and missed school. However, upon checking her bedroom, she found it empty. The mother then speculated that Jessica might have requested a ride to school from her father. After contacting him, she learned that he had left for work alone that morning. Worrying that there might be an issue with Jessica's car, the mother retrieved a spare key to attempt to start it. As she approached the vehicle, a troubling sight met her eyes. The driver's door was ajar, and more alarmingly, Jessica's cell phone was on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen. Beneath the front seat, one of Jessica's shoes and her keys were found, while her textbooks, work clothes, and purse were located in the back seat. The mother was immediately filled with dread. It was clear that someone had attempted to call 911 on Jessica's phone but had not completed the call. Furthermore, it was inconceivable that Jessica would have simply abandoned all her belongings in the car and walked away, especially considering that their home was situated on the outskirts of town, requiring her to traverse several miles on foot. Jessica's parents contacted the school, only to discover that their daughter had not attended class, and the school had failed to inform them as it was supposed to. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the restaurant where they both worked reached out to her parents, reporting that Jessica had not arrived for her shift, which heightened their anxiety regarding her whereabouts. Due to her absence from both school and work, along with the discovery that her belongings, including a phone with a dialed number of 91, were left in an unlocked vehicle, Jessica's parents made the decision to contact the police. However, the sheriff merely suggested that Jessica had likely wandered off and would eventually return home. He disregarded the fact that one of her shoes was left in the car, which would hinder her ability to travel far. Despite their concerns that their daughter might be in danger, Jessica's parents were unable to persuade the sheriff to initiate an investigation, forcing them to return home in despair. Subsequently, Jessica's parents took it upon themselves to search for her. They reached out to relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had seen her. Together, they began a search throughout the town, yet Jessica remained missing. The following morning, her parents returned to the sheriff's office to report that Jessica had still not come home. This time, he sent 2 officers to examine her vehicle. However, the parents encountered yet another setback. The officers inspected the car without wearing gloves, touching all items inside with their bare hands. Additionally, they failed to search Jessica's room, which is typically standard procedure. Once again feeling let down by law enforcement, Jessica's parents sought assistance from local media to highlight their daughter's disappearance and the police's indifference. Alongside relatives and friends, they organized their own search efforts and began distributing flyers containing information about Jessica. The search was spearheaded by Jessica's father and his brother. Stanley, well acquainted with the area, was apprehensive about the situation and opted to search the vicinity near a local river. This location had garnered a negative reputation, being frequented by local drug dealers and other criminals due to its dense and isolated environment. For several hours, Jessica's relatives scoured the challenging terrain near the river, yet they found no sign of her. The following morning, an unusual event occurred. Jessica's parents were at home while their son played in the yard. Suddenly, he dashed inside, claiming he had heard a cry for help that resembled his sister's voice. Jessica's father seized his shotgun and hurried outside to investigate the source of the cry, coinciding with the arrival of his brother, who quickly joined the search. They soon observed smoke rising from the property of their neighbor, a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. As they approached, they discovered Brooks burning what appeared to be clothing on his land, which raised their suspicions. Jessica's father requested permission to search Brooks' property, however, Brooks declined and insisted they leave. This was not the only peculiar behavior exhibited by Brooks. Prior to Jessica's disappearance, her relatives had maintained a cordial relationship with him and his family. Yet, shortly thereafter, Brooks began acting erratically, frequently driving slowly past their home while gazing at them with a disconcerting smile. Additionally, Jessica's parents received mysterious phone calls from an unidentified man who remained silent, merely breathing heavily. They suspected Brooks might be involved but were unable to ascertain the truth. Following the unsettling incident of Brooks burning clothing on his property, Jessica's parents opted to approach the police once more, as they had previously shown minimal interest in the case. They conveyed their observations and requested that officers utilize cadaver dogs to investigate Brooks's premises. The police consented, employing Jessica's clothing to assist in tracking her scent. The dogs led them to a fire pit located on Brooks's property, however, no significant evidence was uncovered. Additionally, the dogs uncovered black gloves in one of the sheds, indicating the presence of a scent linked to decomposition throughout the area. Throughout the search, Brooks exhibited increasingly suspicious behavior, yet the police failed to establish a connection between him and Jessica's disappearance, leaving the investigation unfulfilled. Frustrated with the police's inaction, Jessica's father reached out to the FBI. Although the Bureau typically refrains from launching investigations based solely on calls from relatives of missing persons, they chose to intervene promptly due to the alarming details provided by Jessica's parents. Following a comprehensive investigation, the FBI determined that a truly horrific event may have occurred. This marked the commencement of a serious investigation that local law enforcement had been hesitant to pursue. FBI agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and her vehicle, seizing all potential evidence for laboratory analysis. They also organized extensive ground searches, utilizing helicopters and enlisting volunteers, and meticulously examined the pond near Jessica's home, considering the possibility that her body might be located there. FBI agents conducted a thorough investigation of Brooks's farm, where they uncovered a troubling discovery in one of the sheds, a printed photograph of Jessica. This unsettling find led detectives to strongly suspect Brooks's involvement in her disappearance, as well as his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, whose peculiar behavior during the police search raised further concerns. However, investigators faced a challenge: they found no substantial evidence to warrant the arrest of either brother. Consequently, they redirected their efforts towards searching the surrounding area, operating under the grim assumption that Jessica was likely no longer alive. On September 27, 17 days after Jessica's disappearance, the police received a report from a woman driving along a road adjacent to the river where Jessica's father had initially searched for her. She noticed something unusual near a tree just off the road and decided to investigate. Upon closer inspection, she realized it appeared to be a human body and promptly contacted the authorities. FBI agents arrived at the location and confirmed the presence of a lifeless young woman, who was missing several fingers and limbs. A rope, marked with red and silver paint, was found tied around her legs, and the absence of parts of her clothing led detectives to suspect that she had been sexually assaulted. Due to the advanced decomposition of the body, they were unable to definitively identify her as Jessica. Officers visited her home to seek assistance from her parents in identifying the remains. Jessica's father was unable to face the reality of his deceased daughter, but her mother agreed to come to the scene. Initially, she struggled to recognize her, but eventually. A small butterfly tattoo, identical to her daughter's, was discovered on the body, positioned in the same location. Medical experts later confirmed the identity of the deceased and determined that the cause of death was strangulation. Numerous bruises were also observed on her body, and experts indicated that her limbs and fingers had been detached post-mortem, suggesting she was still alive at that time. However, the most harrowing revelation was that Jessica had survived for approximately 3 days following her disappearance, indicating that law enforcement had an opportunity to rescue her, yet no action was taken. Following the discovery of the body, the FBI opted to re-interview Brooks. During this subsequent conversation, he initially claimed to have seen Jessica near her home on the morning of her disappearance, but later altered his account, asserting that he had not seen her at all that day and that he had been in bed with his wife. When detectives questioned his wife, her testimony contradicted his. The FBI persisted in their inquiries, asking Brooks how he would respond if his fingerprints were found on the victim's body, despite no such evidence existing. His response was notably suspicious. He stated he would have to confess to everything in that scenario. Subsequently, he failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed with the trial. They recognized that the likelihood of securing a guilty verdict was relatively low, as they lacked substantial evidence linking Brooks to the murder, relying instead on unsettling but circumstantial details. Detectives continued to pursue the case, seeking any further evidence despite the indirect indications of his involvement. As preparations for the trial progressed, investigators recalled a notable detail. During the search of Brooks's vehicle, they discovered a rope resembling the one used to bind the victim's legs. However, the absence of DNA samples on the rope rendered it merely circumstantial evidence. The trial commenced in January 2003, with Brooks's attorney asserting the complete lack of evidence and proclaiming his client's innocence. During the proceedings, another significant detail emerged. Alongside the victim's body, investigators uncovered some of the victim's missing limbs. These were placed in specialized containers and submitted to the local police, but the investigators disregarded the labels instructing them to refrigerate the contents. Consequently, the boxes were left at room temperature, leading to severe decomposition. This oversight resulted in the potential loss of crucial evidence, including possible DNA traces from the perpetrator. The circumstantial evidence against Brooks ultimately proved insufficient, and the jurors were unable to reach a unanimous verdict, allowing him to walk free. Under state law, he could only be recharged if new evidence surfaced. For Jessica's parents, this outcome was a heartbreaking disappointment. They remained convinced of Brooks's guilt. They believed that had law enforcement taken their responsibilities more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. Ultimately, they lost all hope of achieving justice, and the case remained unresolved in the years that followed. In 2012, the investigation into a long-abandoned case took a new turn with the arrival of Detective Lynn Hunt at the local police department. Tasked with examining unsolved cases, her attention was drawn to the murder of Jessica Dish. Upon reviewing the case files, Hunt was appalled by the negligence displayed by her predecessors. The documents were riddled with inaccuracies, lacked references to conversations with relevant parties, and the evidence was inadequately documented. The handling of the case was so poor that she found herself needing to restart the investigation from the ground up, 13 years after the crime occurred. Her initial action involved reaching out to Jessica's family. One of her brothers, now an adult and living independently from their parents, provided Hunt with a box of Jessica's belongings that had been retrieved from her car. He had preserved these items since the police returned them to the family. Hunt was once again taken aback by the careless manner in which her colleagues had managed the evidence, failing to adhere to proper storage protocols. Although the likelihood of these items yielding useful information after so many years was slim, she meticulously examined everything available. During her review, Hunt stumbled upon a noteworthy detail in the documents: Brooks's medical examination report, which indicated that his IQ was a mere 61, a significantly low score. This revelation raised serious questions about the police's actions, particularly regarding Brooks's interrogations. Given his cognitive limitations, it was plausible that he did not fully comprehend the questions posed to him and may have provided inadequate responses. Consequently, Hunt began to contemplate the possibility that Brooks might not be connected to the case at all, as his peculiar behavior could be attributed to his intellectual challenges. Incredibly low IQ, so she started thinking about who else could have committed this murder. This continued until September 2014, almost 15 years after Jessica's death, when a colleague from another department called Hunt to share some interesting information. According to Hunt, he shared his cell with an inmate from Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know the true identity of Jessica Dish's murderer. The two became friends and occasionally exchanged details about their crimes, but one day the cellmate told him that he had murdered Jessica Dish, among other things. The informant then dropped a bombshell, revealing to the detective the identity of this man, leaving her stunned. It was Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle, her father's brother. Stanley told him that he had sexually abused Jessica for years while living in their home, and he threatened to kill her or someone close to her if she ever mentioned it. Confessed to Stanley about the abuse she had endured at the hands of her own uncle. On the morning of September 10, Stanley showed up at her house when Jessica was by herself. She had already loaded all of her belongings into her car and was outside when he demanded that she end her relationship with her boyfriend. Jessica refused, threatening to expose him if he didn't leave her alone. He then began threatening her, so she reached for the phone and tried to dial 911. Before being taken to an abandoned shed near the location of her body, Jessica broke free from Stanley's attempt to grab her and fled into the house. The man followed her to her room, hit her, and bound her in her sheets. Stanley emerged as a potential suspect in the murder case, prompting a search for evidence to substantiate these alarming allegations. On the initial day of the investigation, the team was unable to find any clues despite the relentless rain. They excavated areas that aligned with the informant's description, but their efforts proved fruitless. The following day, Jessica's brother and Hunt revisited the location. During their journey, he noticed an abandoned barn adjacent to the road. They proceeded to that site and began to dig into the soil, and almost immediately, they experienced a significant breakthrough. A buried bedsheet was uncovered. Hunt collected this evidence and rushed to Jessica's home. Over the years, her parents had preserved her room exactly as it had been on the day of her disappearance. This preservation allowed Hunt to verify that the bedsheet belonged to Jessica's bedding, as it was missing from the bed, and the other linens exhibited the same pattern. Following this revelation, Stanley was arrested and brought in for interrogation. Although he appeared visibly distressed during the discussions with the detectives, he steadfastly refused to admit to the crime. Ultimately, he was charged with murder, and the case moved forward to court. Jessica's father was in disbelief that his own brother could commit such a horrific act against his daughter. Initially, he experienced a phase of complete denial but eventually reconciled with this unbearable truth. He later recalled that in the early days following Jessica's disappearance, it was Stanley who had proposed searching for her body near the river. However, during that search, he suddenly became ill, and his brother drove him away. The incident occurred just a few hundred yards from the barn where Jessica was situated, indicating that Stanley intentionally misled them to prevent her from being discovered while she was still alive. In preparation for the trial, Detective Hunt investigated the suspect's background in search of additional evidence. She was already aware that he had previously been incarcerated for assaulting another girl in their family. However, Hunt soon uncovered a more troubling revelation. Several other women closely associated with Stanley reported to the police that he had sexually abused them during their childhood. The pattern was alarming. He would inform his relatives that he had nowhere to stay temporarily and requested to be accommodated in their homes. When left alone with the girls, Stanley perpetrated his heinous acts, using threats to ensure their silence. After hearing these accounts, the police concluded that Stanley had been engaging in such behavior for 3 decades. Despite this, Detective Hunt recognized that obtaining a conviction for the murder would be difficult, as there was a lack of concrete evidence against Stanley, such as fingerprints or DNA. She persisted in her investigation until she discovered a box of old files that she had not yet reviewed. Upon examining its contents, Hunt was once again taken aback by the negligence of her predecessors who initially managed the case. Inside the box was a letter dated June 26, 2002, from an informant who relayed the same story that Hunt had only heard 12 years later from an inmate in a Kentucky prison. By the summer of 2002, Stanley was already serving a sentence for assaulting a minor relative. Stanley confided in his cellmate about the murder of Jessica. Unbeknownst to him, this cellmate was a police informant who subsequently wrote a letter to the relevant department, detailing the horrific actions Stanley had taken against his niece. However, the police dismissed the letter, likely due to their long-standing belief in Brooks's involvement, which led them to overlook other potential suspects. Hunt was once again disheartened by her colleagues' unprofessionalism. Had they been more diligent, this case might have been resolved as early as 2002. After all these years, she could only await the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally confront the delayed justice for his crimes. The legal proceedings commenced in 2015, with Stanley maintaining his innocence. In the courtroom, Jessica's parents struggled to face the man who had shattered their lives, feeling a deep anger that he could not simply confess to provide them with some semblance of closure. The prosecution was concerned about the likelihood of securing a guilty verdict for murder, primarily due to the lack of substantial evidence against him. Additionally, there were complications regarding assault charges involving other girls in the family, all of whom would need to testify in detail about Stanley's actions. Consequently, the prosecution opted to extend a plea deal to Stanley, offering to drop the death penalty in exchange for his confession to both the assaults on family members and the murder of Jessica. Ultimately, he accepted the deal and pleaded guilty, without the obligation to reveal any further details. The specific circumstances surrounding the crimes have left Jessica's parents, who sought to uncover the complete truth, feeling dissatisfied. Despite their concerns, Stanley chose to remain silent in accordance with the terms of his plea deal, which resulted in the murderer receiving a 20-year prison sentence, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Given that he was 56 at the time of sentencing, Stanley could potentially be released at the age of 71. Following the trial, Jessica's father vowed that if his brother were to survive his prison sentence, he would be waiting to take matters into his own hands. In 2019, Stanley participated in his first interview, asserting his innocence and claiming he was at work on the morning of Jessica's disappearance. However, this alibi could not be substantiated. After 2 decades, he was unable to clarify how 2 unrelated informants provided identical accounts, including specific details known only to the murderer, such as the burial site of the bedsheets. Regarding David Brooks, detectives have not dismissed the possibility of his minor involvement in the case. Stanley was acquainted with him and may have solicited his assistance in disposing of the victim's belongings. Given Brooks's low IQ, he might not have fully comprehended the situation. It is conceivable that he incinerated the girl's clothing in a fire, and Stanley may have provided him with gloves that carried the scent of the body detected by the dogs. There is also a possibility that he left a photograph of Jessica in Stanley's shed to implicate him. However, the truth may remain elusive, as Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart complications. Notably, on the 3rd day following Jessica's disappearance, her younger brother reported hearing a cry for help outside, believing it to be his sister, yet it remains uncertain what truly transpired. At that moment, it is possible that the girl was still alive. However, Stanley had her confined in a barn several miles from her residence. It is likely that the child either imagined the sounds due to the stress of the situation or that someone else was indeed screaming. There exists a rather unlikely scenario to consider. Shortly after Jessica's father rushed outside, Stanley arrived at the house, indicating he was in close proximity. It raises the possibility that the girl could have been in his vehicle, possibly with her mouth taped shut or unconscious. Nevertheless, this theory appears to be highly implausible. We invite you to share your thoughts on this narrative in the comments section. If you found this video enjoyable, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.